Doug Poirier here. I'm your host today, and I'm with Max Pruger from Kaseya. Max is the general manager overseeing marketing for data compliance manager, GRC, Vulscan, and my IT process. How are you doing today, Max?
I'm doing fantastic, Doug. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you coming on with such short notice and helping me out with my podcast. So I guess let's just dive right into it. First question is what inspired you to get involved in compliance?
Yeah, so I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of my background a little bit. So I graduated with a degree in computer science way back during the dot-com bubble. So it was fantastic. If you knew how to fog a mirror and turn on a computer, you immediately had a good paying job. And so I started my career as a developer, and I built some of the largest e-commerce sites in the world. And then from there, the bubble burst. I went to work for IBM for a little bit. And then I was lucky enough to find this very small startup company called Kaseya. I interviewed in our quote unquote accounting office, which at the time was a top floor of a townhouse with a folding table. And that was our accounting office. We had one accountant there. I think we're about 5,000 employees, but spent about 10 years with Kaseya, left in 2015, started a software company that, knock on wood, did pretty well, got acquired by a Fortune 50 company. And to get back to your question, in 2019, the current CEO of Kaseya, Fred Vacola, reached out to me and said, look, we have this opportunity in compliance. We think compliance is going to be the next big, small, medium-sized business opportunity out there. Every single organization is going to have to deal with compliance, and we've got a new product called Compliance Manager GRC that we're rolling out, and we'd love for you to come back and run that. So I agreed. That was right with when GDPR was starting to roll out. Looking at the industry, every enterprise organization out there has a GRC platform, and that stands for governance, risk, and compliance. And if you understand how industries work, everything starts at the enterprise level and then kind of flows its way down. So mid-market, small, medium businesses, they're all going to have to deal with this. And you can disagree, but I'm not seeing compliance go away. All I'm seeing is more standards and requirements and guidelines and so on. So I took over in 2019 and been building out that business unit ever since.
So now Kaseya is over $1 billion company.
Correct. So so like I said, I was employee like 23, 24. Today we've got over 5,000 employees. Last year we acquired Datto. It was a $6.2 billion acquisition of a publicly traded company, and we took them private. So the combined entities are over $1 billion in revenue, over $10 billion in market cap, and we are continuing to grow and expand. And to be blunt, if you see everything that's going on in the IT industry and all the layoffs, Kaseya is the exact opposite. We announced that we are going to be hiring about another 2,000 employees just out of our Miami office, which is where our headquarters is, and we're continuing to expand.
Did I just see? I think I saw it just yesterday. You guys hired this year 2,600 new employees in Miami. Is that right?
Yeah, that's about right. Like I said, I go back to our first sales kickoff. There were 5 of us sitting around a table at the Courtyard by Marriott, and in January of this year, we had our sales kickoff, and I believe we had about 2,500 folks at that one. So, I like to say that. We're a 17-year overnight success, but we just continue to expand and provide products and services, to the IT landscape. So whether that's managed service providers, whether that's internal IT staff, our entire goal is to make it easier for the multifunction IT professional to provide security, compliance, IT services to their organizations.
And you guys are multinational companies serving tens of thousands of MSPs, right?
Absolutely. So we have our U.S. headquarters is in Miami, but we have offices in Vancouver. We have what we call Center of Excellence in Ireland, in Dunkirk, Ireland, actually. We are in Krakow, Poland, Australia. I mean, there's dozens of offices today. Yeah, so we are worldwide.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, let's get into the nitty gritty. So why don't we talk about the distinction between cybersecurity and compliance?
Yeah, so obviously they go hand in hand. just in a simple definition, the way I like to describe it is that security is delivering your IT services in a secure manner. Compliance is simply being able to prove it through documentation using some sort of internal best practice or industry required framework. So yeah, I mentioned GRC, that stands for governance, risk, and compliance. And again, in simple terms, governance is anything that you make yourself do. Compliance is anything that a third party makes you do. And then obviously risk is sort of the intersection of assets, vulnerabilities, and threats. So if you have an asset, so for example, you've got a computer and you have a vulnerability, you've left it exposed on the internet, but nobody cares about it, there's no threat, then your risk is minimal. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have your asset, and let's take that same computer, you have your vulnerability, or you don't have a vulnerability because it's not on the internet, you have it plugged into a wall with no connection, nobody else can access to it. Even if there is a threat that's out there and they can't access it, once again, your risk is minimal. When those three things intersect, that's when you have your risk.
I gotcha. So apply that to compliance. Like, how many industries have to be compliant, at least the ones that you serve? I know
Sure.
there's a lot. That's a mouthful.
Sure. So let's be clear. Every single organization in the world has compliance requirements. So again, governance is anything you make yourself do. So anything you make your employees do, anything you make your vendors do, that is called governance. So you have to track and document what those employees are doing. So if you make your own employees show up at 9 a.m. in the morning and log in and they're required to do two-factor authentication, that's governance. And every organization has governance. Compliance is whatever a third party makes you do. And to be clear, every single state in the United States, including Puerto Rico and DC, they have breach notification laws on the books. Hopefully, every single organization that is listening to this podcast has some amount of cyber insurance, and cyber insurance has their own terms and conditions, often referred to as covenants, and you must comply with the covenants in those cyber insurance policies if you hope and expect to get a payout in the event of a breach. So, so again, that's on the compliance side. In addition to that, I will point out, if you're in a regulated industry, then it's easy, because if you do healthcare, congratulations, you're subject to HIPAA. So you have to comply with all the HIPAA guidelines. If you are in the Department of Defense space, you now have what's called CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So congratulations, you need to follow NIST 800-171, and you actually have to get certified. So there are lots and lots of compliance requirements that are out there as well. If you do any type of financing, so if you are a car dealership, if you are a real estate office, if you're a private school, now you have to deal with what's called GLBA, so the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act FTC safeguard rule, which will go in effect in about 2 months. So we are in April now. So in June, everybody has to deal with that. So again, every single organization, every company in the United States, look at your state. Every state has breach notification laws on the books that you must comply with. And then there are other, lots of other requirements that are out there that potentially you have to apply with. And I'm sorry, I just missed another one. If you take credit cards, congratulations, you have to deal with PCI. And most organizations take credit cards.
I know PCI is not my favorite to deal with, but a lot of people have farmed that responsibility out to someone else. So they don't keep that stuff local, but they still have to meet certain levels of PCI requirements in terms of secure internet and secure machines. So there's a lot. So let's talk a little bit more about regulation, because I think this is something that's going to change more and more. Last year, they came out with some serious regulation, mostly targeted at very large companies. What do you see changing for small companies as time goes on in terms of regulation, and what the government's going to do to require businesses to protect themselves? Because that's really where the problem is people don't know they have to. And I think the government is going to start forcing them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you pointed out, and I was just said earlier, everything starts at the enterprise level. That's what all the regulations are targeted to at first. And then what ends up happening is that once the enterprise starts complying, then it flows down to the mid-market. And we've seen this before. So not to go back too far in time, but during the dot-com bubble, there was a company out there called Enron. For those who don't know Enron, couple great movies out there. And to be brief, they committed lots of fraud. And so immediately after that collapse, you had lots of regulations that came out. So you had Sarbanes-Oxley that came out, again, things like GLBA and so on after other. So what ends up happening is if you look at today, every single enterprise organization has a GRC product. They have a compliance officer. They all have security officers and so on. And again, that's kind of flow down. At the same time, my opinion is self-attestations are going to go away. That's what HIPAA is. HIPAA is a self-attestation. If you take health insurance, HIPAA's been around since 1995, and every single doctor out there says, of course I'm doing it, and they check the box and so on. And so we're moving away from self-attestations to eventually having to get certifications, and the government is forcing that today with the Department of Defense. So again, not to go through all the background, every DoD supply chain contractor was supposed to be doing a self-attestation that they were complying with what's called NIST 800-171. You don't have to worry about that, but it's a set of guidelines and controls. And in order to get a contract, every one of them was checking the box saying, of course, I'm doing this. And when they got audited at the end of 2019, they had an over 90% failure rate. So the government came back and said, sorry, but we can't trust you to do a self-attestation. We're going to come out with a certification program. They are starting to roll that out. So they started to roll that out at the end of 2020. Every DoD supply chain contract will eventually have what's called a CMMC level on it. And the organization has to get certified by an independent third body at that level to be able to bid on that contract. And it's starting with the DoD, as you can understand why. Lots of very secure data. There's what they're trying to protect is what's called controlled unclassified information, CUI. But my understanding, what I've heard, is that eventually then that's going to flow to other industries. So in HIPAA, what you're trying to protect is PHI, so protected health information. And then for PCI, you're trying to protect PII, personally identifiable information. So your name, phone number, social security, and so on. And eventually self-attestations will go away and organizations will have to get certified on their security and compliance.
Now, do you see that pushing down to the average general mom and pop store at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. And not to go back in history, but we talked about PCI a couple seconds ago. So yeah, you are correct. With PCI, it's what is in scope. A lot of folks outsource that. But my brother has been in the retail industry for about 20 some odd years. I encourage every single person on this call, if you're taking credit cards, go look at your credit card bill. Don't be surprised if you see a little fee on the bottom that says PCI non-compliance fee. So even though you're outsourcing it, if your internal environment that touches any of those credit cards is not in scope, they're going to charge you a little fee on the bottom. In fact, actually, I just looked at a credit card bill. There are 4 separate fees in the same month for PCI non-compliance, and those things do add up.
I have seen those. Yeah. I have seen those. I guess so. You had mentioned the DoD and government. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about foreign national actors and the impact that they're having and the things that they're trying to do, and I guess how compliance and regulation is trying to address those issues.
Yeah. So there's 2 types of cyber criminals effectively out there. There are those who are doing it purely for revenue purposes, and then there are nation state actors who they appreciate the revenue too, but they're primarily doing it to get access to classified information. So exfiltrating data from organizations, typically government organizations or enterprise organizations, so that they can take that data and bring it back to whatever country is sponsoring them. At the same time, again, while they appreciate that revenue, that is not their main focus. We've seen supply chain attacks on our water supply here in the United States, down in Florida. You see lots of supply chain attacks on the energy grid. So, even though the attacks are similar, they're for different purposes, and to try to inject different pain, I would say, inside of the different industries.
Right. So, here's one of the things, and you're a sales manager, and so we're going to change the train here, the direction for a second. Selling these products is somewhat difficult because when you go in to educate people, it seems it's all based on fear. And I think it is, right? It's like, look, there's a threat out there. I want to help protect you. And a lot of times people don't fully understand the threat and you explain it. And it seems like that to a lot of people on the other side who are not informed, that it seems like it's a lot of fear mongering. How do you address that to clients? Or how would you recommend that MSPs address that to clients, or even business owners that are listening to this? Like, how should they take it?
Sure. So first and foremost, security and compliance is not a product. It is a process. So it is a never-ending process. I like to say, security and compliance is a journey. It is not a destination. You are never done with security and compliance. You are always iterating because it is an arms race. You're out there against the cyber criminals and they're innovating. They're trying new tactics, and your job is to try to stop and protect, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover to those tactics. So first and foremost, again, just to be clear, there's no product out there that you can buy and congratulations, you're perfectly secure and compliant. So it is an ongoing process. It's also layered because multiple products are required to stop, to attempt to stop or defer the cyber criminals that are out there. So that's just kind of part one. So part two is I don't recommend selling on fear. I understand it's out there. There is a lot of risk associated with not securing your environment. But at the end of the day, for example, like HIPAA, I often talk about how, HIPAA, it's not about compliance, it's about patient care. So exposing your consumers' data, your employees' data to a cyber criminal and having them put that on the dark web is very painful. So if somebody has to go through identity theft and tax fraud and redoing all their credit cards, that's a very painful process for the end users as well. So again, it's not just the fear that you're going to get crypto locked and you're going to have to pay some sort of ransom, but it's also just doing the right thing when it comes to protecting consumer data, your customers' data, your internal data, so that doesn't get exposed on the dark web, and then all of your clients have to deal with that as well. So look, at the end of the day, there's only one of three reasons that anybody ever buys anything. So it's either got to increase revenue, decrease cost, or mitigate risk. And so when it comes to security and compliance, initially it's all about mitigating risk. And once you mitigate that risk, it significantly decreases your cost because the likelihood of being ransomware or crypto locked is minimized.
Right. You brought up a really interesting point about it being a process, because one of the more difficult things that I have to do to explain to clients is like there is no prevention. You can't stop it, right? And then the question becomes, well, why am I doing anything? And my answer usually is, and tell me if you agree, is that we have police, but they can't prevent crime. We have firefighters, they don't prevent fire, but they go a long way into mitigating it. And I think when it comes to, for me, cybersecurity, or for you for compliance, it's about not being low-hanging fruit, right? That helps enormously. And I think too, and this is something I would really like to hear you talk about, and you touched on it a little bit already, is insurance. And one of the things that we're seeing is that insurance, if you're not taking care of yourself, insurance isn't going to pay to cover you. At the best case scenario is that you get a partial payment, but you have to cover all your bases, and there are so many. I mean, we could go on for hours talking about each individual topic about what you're supposed to cover. Give me your insights on cyber insurance, and I already know it's a question I already know, but I'd like to hear your opinion about why they're not paying out full payments, or where they may not pay out at all.
Sure. Yeah, and just to reiterate what you said, I mean, security and compliance is not about just IT. I mean, I lock my door when I go to bed at night. I close my garage door. When I go into a parking lot and park my car, I roll up the windows and I lock the doors there as well. Does that mean that I'm never going to get my car stolen or somebody try to break into my house? I mean, I have an alarm system and so on. So you don't want to be that low-hanging fruit. You don't want to be the car that somebody walks by and tries the door and it opens up and you leave your key on the dash. So just like with IT, I mean, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make it as difficult as possible, and you're trying to prevent the cyber criminals from getting in. Most of these attacks, they are not targeted attacks. They are I hate to say it, a shotgun approach where the cyber criminals are out there and they're sending literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of phishing campaign emails out to SMBs, and they're just waiting for somebody to click on it. So, that's why you do your security awareness training. That's why you use products like Bullfish and Graphis that will prevent and try to block those emails from getting in. So again, there's no such thing as perfect security. You're just trying to mitigate the process as much as possible, and you don't want to be the low-hanging fruit. And I shy away from statistics on these types of calls, but an organization that's been hit once is 75% more likely to be attacked a second time within a 24-month period. So if they already know, if they know that your door is open, guess what? They're going to keep trying that door to see if they can continue to get in. So that's that part. As far as cyber insurance goes, I was pointing out in 2019 when I took over the compliance manager GRC business unit, I actually thought it was the government that was going to really force organizations to start taking compliance seriously. But what I've seen over the last couple of years, it really is the cyber insurance organizations. At a really high level, insurance is a very easy business. They collect premiums and then they pay out claims. And somewhere in the middle, they take a very, very small percentage of that for themselves. And that's how insurance works. And to be clear, they're not in the business of paying out claims. They're in the business of collecting premiums. So, insurance companies, that's what they do. And what they do is that they calculate risk. So historically, what's happened is that in the cyber insurance world, it is a relatively new industry. And so insurance companies priced out that risk and started selling policies. And what they quickly discovered was that they significantly underpriced that risk. So I believe, again, don't hold me to this, in 2019, for every dollar in premium collected, cyber insurance companies were paying out about 14 cents. As of last year, for every dollar collected, they were paying closer to 90 cents. And so, no surprise, cyber insurance policies and costs have skyrocketed over the years because, again, they have to balance out their premiums with their claims. In addition to that, as I said, insurance companies all have, it's a legal contract. They all have terms and conditions. And so part of that legal contract is that when you apply for the cyber insurance policy, and Doug, how many cyber insurance policies do you fill out on a regular basis for your clients?
A lot.
A lot.
Yes. And they change constantly.
And they change. And what's on them? Are you doing multi-factor authentication? Are you patching? Are you backing up your environment? And you can click yes to every single one of them. And that's fantastic because then you'll get a policy. But if you have an incident and you cannot prove through documentation that you are actually complying with the terms and conditions of that policy, then the likelihood of actually getting a payout is minimized. And there's I would say, in our industry, a famous case, or what's becoming quickly a famous case for Travelers Insurance, I believe in December of last year, so just a couple of months ago, where they had an organization. They said that they were doing all the right things in their insurance policy. When they filled it out, they got cyber insurance. They had a breach. Travelers paid out, I believe, $2 million to remediate that, but Travelers reserved the right to audit the customer's environment and make sure that they were actually following those covenants. And when they did, no surprise, they were not following all those covenants. And so Travelers filed a lawsuit to not only recover their $2 million, but I believe something like $500,000 in legal fees. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not providing any legal advice here or anything like that, but I've looked through it. And, the contract says that you must do X, Y, and Z, and the company was not doing X or Y or Z. And so most likely Travelers is going to recover. So again, I don't care what you're paying for your cyber insurance policy. If it doesn't pay out, it's worth zero.
Right. And I've heard so many stories like that too. So just up here in this region in New Hampshire, a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was a municipality, not one of my clients, but they got hit and they filed a claim. They got half back. They lost I think it was $1.2 million and they got 600,000 for it. And 6 months later, they got hit again. They lost 1.1 and they got nothing back because they didn't make any changes. They didn't do anything to remediate. And it's a tough thing. I mean, you can have cyber insurance, but it's useless if you aren't following, the terms that you've agreed to. I'll say this too. The other thing I'm seeing is I review cybersecurity contracts for a lot of my clients, and they'll say, "Oh, it's the same as last year," and I'm like, "That doesn't guarantee anything because you read through it. The price is the same, but I've seen premiums go from 2 million down to 250,000, and that is huge. That is a huge problem. It's like, why carry it if it's not going to cover you? So you have to read, if you're a business listening to this podcast right now, you have to read your contracts. You have to make sure that everything is the same. And they're expecting you to read it. That's kind of your responsibility, right? Don't just sign it.
Yeah, and I was on a panel discussion with a VP at a very large cyber insurance company, and we were having discussion. I always think it's kind of interesting right now because I have a lot of organizations, I have MSPs, end users come back to me and say, "How do I get cheaper cyber insurance? How do I get cheaper cyber insurance?" And the VP said, "Right now, the goal is not to get cheaper cyber insurance. The goal is merely to qualify for cyber insurance." Because according to him, roughly 40% of all organizations out there don't even qualify for cyber insurance. So yes, eventually, once people are complying, you can prove it, then you're trying to lower your cyber insurance rates, and it'll be the same thing as car rates. If you have airbags and anti-lock brakes and everything else, you may be able to get a discount on your policy if you're using all the security tools and so on. But today, again, the real step one is just making sure that your environment even qualifies for cyber insurance, because to your point, prices are going up and coverage is coming down. And it all just goes back to, what does an insurance company do? Collects premiums, pays claims,
Right.
and the premiums have to be more than the claims, and the claims have been much higher than they had originally priced them out.
Yeah, it's something that I've noticed a lot of businesses and municipalities just they struggle with because the prices of everything is going up, and it's kind of hard to argue. All right, where do I cut my costs? Because I'm going to need that insurance. I'm going to need my IT guy. I'm going to need my antivirus and my backup. There's just so much that goes into it, and they're difficult conversations, but they just are what they are. You can only cut back so much.
Yeah.
You
And
know, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. The other thing is, it's a little bit counterintuitive as well. So in the early days before cyber insurance, the cyber criminals would ask $20,000, $30,000. They'd ask for 2 Bitcoin. At that time, Bitcoin's $5,000 each. So you'd send them $10,000. Well, now that they have cyber insurance policies, cyber criminals are pretty smart. They can actually go look up what a customer's cyber insurance coverage is, and guess what? They're going to ask for that $1 million because they know that that's covered. So the company then has to be able to prove that they actually were doing what they said they were doing, as we pointed out, to apply for it. But those payouts, as you said, everything is going up. And the biggest, I would say, that what's going up significantly faster than even inflation today is what cyber criminals are charging for ransomware.
You made another good point. Is they know about you. If they're targeting you, they know everything there is possibly to know about you. They know who owns it. They know pretty good idea of how much you're making every year. So they know exactly how much to ransom you for, and they know how much pain you're willing to deal with before you'll pay out. And the research that they will do to get into your organization it's absolutely incredible. That like the hoops that they will jump, and it's hard to explain that to people because a lot of business owners like, I'm small, they don't even know who I am, I'm $5 million a year. I'm like, that's great, you're a $200,000 hit, no problem. All right, and it doesn't take much to get your information. Everyone who's on Facebook that works for you, you probably have a Facebook page, you probably do Facebook advertising. They may even get their malware through to you through Facebook. There's just so many ways that they can find out about you. And yeah, and cyber insurance is definitely one of them.
Yeah. And yeah, again, you got to understand that a lot of these criminals, they live in parts of the world where $100 a month is what the cost of living is. Well, that's what the average salary is. So if they hit you for $200,000, you bet they're going to go do their research and their homework as soon as they find out that you have been you're crypto locked and you've got insurance. So yeah, for these types of organizations, it's kind of fun. My mom, obviously she's older. She sometimes asks me, don't these folks have real jobs? And I try to explain to her, they make more money at their real job than most people make at our real jobs. And so as long as that revenue is coming, and also there's very, very little risk to these organizations. If they're in some foreign country and their governments aren't, one, maybe sponsoring them, but even more so, if they're not going to prosecute them, there's no risk for them. They'll just continue doing it.
Right. No, I agree. I think that's one of the most difficult things for people to cope with is like, okay, how are we going to get these people? And look, if they're in a Western country and they can be tracked, I've seen it. They can be caught, especially like, some kid who's here in the United States thinks he can pull it off. They're easy to find. But it's the people who are in other countries. Good luck, especially if they're moving the money through multiple bank accounts or through cryptocurrency. You're never going to find them. And the FBI just fills out the report, sends it over to the cyber insurance company, and then hopefully you get your money.
Yep. And if they
You
get
know,
caught, guess what? There's 3 other ones right behind them that are going to set up shop anyway. So that, I mean, again, that's the challenge. There's cyber criminals as a service today. So you can
yes,
actually subscribe to a service where all you do is send out ransomware, and as soon as somebody clicks on it, a third party is going to take over that transaction for you. They're going to negotiate it and then pay you a small settlement on the back end.
right. It's so complex. It is a whole industry. It's fleshed out. They have CEOs and board members. They are huge companies, and they talk with each other. Hey, this is what's working right now,
Yeah.
right? They tell each other what to do, and they say these companies, oh, we just hit this company. It's so frightening. And we talk about that fear, and it's hard. Like when I'm talking to my clients, like, well, why do I need that? Well, you don't want this to happen to you, and they're like, that's a real thing. I'm like, this is most definitely a real thing.
Yeah.
And so these are the challenges that we have as MSPs talking to small business owners and educating about what the threats are. They're very real. This isn't like you might get struck by lightning one day. It is going to happen to you at some point, sooner than later. If you are not prepared, you could be seriously hurt or go out of business.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And then the real question is, how do you respond to it? So I know we want to talk about incident response plans and breach notification plans and so on, but you must have a plan to respond to it.
Well, let's. I don't want to go too long without talking about Kaseya, because you guys have dozens and dozens, hundreds of products.
Mhm.
I can tell you, being an MSP, and I don't want to get into the products that I use through you guys because I wouldn't want to give anyone an advantage. But the products that you guys offer are just simply amazing. Like the more I get into them and the more that I start using them, I'm so impressed with the ease of use, the implementation, and it's just the notifications that we get. They're overwhelming. So why don't you start with some of the products that you deal with? I see Volscan in the back. I just looked at that. So
Sure. So to your credit, I'm going to be clear again. We have fantastic products, but those are tools. Anybody can buy a hammer, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to build a house. So at the end of the day, it's how you leverage those products. So
right.
Doug, somebody like yourself, who's a fantastic MSP out there, you're obviously putting a process together to secure your customers' organizations and to make them compliant with whatever industry standard, government, whatever regulation that organization has to deal with. So, again, while using our products is fantastic, you put a process around that. So as far as the products themselves go, we do have over 40 SKUs at Kaseya today that range everywhere from networking gear, so your routers, your switches, your firewalls, and so on, all the way to phishing campaigns and products. So I mentioned Graphis, that is a phishing simulation program. Everybody should be using that. That is probably the number one thing that you can do to help secure your organization, because the least secure portion of every single organization out there is the person who's sitting on the other side of the keyboard. You can do everything perfectly, you can run every product out in the world, but if somebody gets an email from their Nigerian cousin who says they're going to send them $75 million and they click on it, well, you just expose that organization to fraud and cyber criminals, and again, you're talking ransomware and everything else that's out there. So the nice thing about Graphis is that again, it runs phishing campaigns on a regular basis. I can tell you, we use every one of our products internally here at Kaseya, and being a 5,000 person organization, we're probably one of the largest customers of our own products. And when we first rolled out Graphis several years ago, the results weren't very good. But over the years, we're constantly rolling it out. What we do is we actually take real phishing emails that is caught by Graphis. We obviously strip out all of the
The malware.
malware. Yeah, thank you. The malware that's in there, and then we send it out as a campaign. And we just did one about a week ago, and the results were fantastic internally. So it's just that constant reiteration of that. So so you start with the Graphis. Bullfish is end user training. Every single state, again, in the United States, has breach notification laws, which require you to do end user training. If you're in a regulated industry, absolutely, you've got to do your end user training. So you watch those videos. Again, the challenge I find with those is that if you do that once a year, out of sight, out of mind. So you've got to do those on a recurring, regular basis.
Agreed.
And then as far as some of the other products, so Compliance Manager GRC, the goal is to build the ultimate GRC platform, so governance, risk, and compliance platform for kind of small, medium-sized businesses to be delivered through MSPs. As I mentioned, every enterprise organization out there today has a GRC platform. They're fantastic, but they're overkill for the vast majority of SMBs out there. They're very complicated. They're very expensive. So compliance manager is kind of like your virtual compliance officer that's literally going to walk you step by step through the different requirements based off of whatever standard you selected. VolScan is internal, external IP-based port scans. Pretty much, we're talking about cyber insurance. Every cyber insurance policy I've seen over the last 2 years is now requiring that you do internal, external vulnerability scans. Be aware that is pretty much what every single cyber criminal will do. They're out there vulnerability scanning externally, like everybody's websites and anything that's available external. And then the first thing that a cyber criminal will do once they have access to one machine is they're going to do a vulnerability scan internally in your network, see what else is available, and then attempt to exfiltrate data and get into those systems as well. So that's how they spread. So that's what VolScan does. I talked about identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So for those that are aware, that's the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, cybersecurity framework. So we have products that fit all those categories. So the first thing you have to do is identify. You must audit your environment, and you must identify every asset that you have on your environment. So every server, every workstation, every mobile phone, every printer, every microfiche machine. So anything that could be exploitable, you have to identify it. And then you protect. That's your antivirus, your EDR. So we have a very nice enterprise detection and response product, malware products, things like, or anti-malware products. And then you respond. So that's your incident response plans, and then you recover, and that's your backup. So your kind of your last line of defense is that it says it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And if you do not want to pay out those cyber criminals, you better have encrypted everything, and then 2, you should have a backup that's offsite, potentially air gapped. We can talk about what that means, but for the most part, you got to have a backup so that you can recover and restore your data.
Right. Yeah, there's so much, and you touched on, I think, a lot of the major points, but there's so much that goes into it. And depending on the industry that someone's in and the amount of how their downtime affects them, being able to bring those machines up virtually instantly while you rebuild their environment is critical. And that's basically what Datto does. I mean, you guys have been the leader in that market space for years and years and years. Wow, so there is just so much. We could just go on and on and on and on. I think maybe we should schedule another one. Let's say hi to Miles. Miles did pop in. How you doing, Miles?
Very good. A lot of information here being spouted. Loved listening to Max talk about compliance. I think it's definitely where the entire industry is going. And it's for us, line level sort of account managers that talk to MSPs day to day, this is where we sort of focus in on, right? Again, much to that fear mongering thing, it's not the idea, it's more so, are you protecting yourself in case of an event, right?
Education, right? And protection.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Max, there are so many gems today, like way more than I thought we were going to be able to touch on, and you explained it so eloquently. I really appreciate that. I know a lot of just general business owners struggle with the techno speak that we use in our jargon. And it's, I think, critical that they understand not just the threat, but the solution and how to articulate that. And to know, as an MSP, we want people to know the value of what they're getting. That just it's just not money being thrown out the window, that it's actually doing something critical and important. And the fact that you're not hearing anything is a good sign, right? And that's where we come from.
Yeah, and if I can just leave with one more point, or add one more point. One thing I do ask everybody: please have an incident response plan and practice it. There's so many folks. So one, people don't even have an incident response plan, so you got to have that. But number two, I've seen so many instances and occasions where someone had an incident response plan and they decided to practice it when they actually have a breach. That is the worst time to practice your incident response plan. So minimum quarterly, have your incident response plan. So your incident response plan is going to identify, if a breach occurs, who do I contact? Do I contact the FBI? Do I contact my lawyer? Do I contact my MSP? The answer to all three of those is probably yes. What order kind of depends on the organization. Do I contact my insurance company? Who do I call? What if the incident happens on the weekend? What happens if my critical infrastructure is malwared or crypto locked, versus what happens if the CEO or the C-suite gets contacted? So it's called a tabletop exercise. You want to practice that before you have an incident, because I can tell you, if you have an incident, things are going to move extremely quickly. And if you have not practiced your incident response plan, it's going to be very painful for you to do it in the event of an actual incident. So that's why I try to tell all organizations: have a plan, update that plan. It is not static. Your environment changes, your C-level executives change, your cyber insurance company changes, your attorneys may change. MSPs hopefully stay the same, but your technology changes inside of your organization as well. So football players practice 6 days a week so they can play for 2 hours, 3 hours, on the weekend. That's the quote unquote easy part. The practice part is really where you have to perfect your craft.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, and we can't stress that enough. There's a lot that goes into all of this. So I definitely want to have you back. So maybe Miles can help set that up. But there's definitely other people in your organization that I want to talk to as well. But this has been fantastic, Max. I really appreciate you guys coming on and giving us this education and all of your time. Did you want to say anything else, Miles, before I sign off? You're all done? All right. Well, my name's Doug Poirier. I am the owner of Umbral Technologies. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Max, thank you so much. Miles, thanks again.